The time was 7:23 a.m. on June 18, 1944. Sergeant Jacob Mertens stood in the third-floor window of a half-destroyed farmhouse outside Cartown, France. Through his K98K scope, he watched an American machine gun nest 200 yards away. The MG-42 had killed 6 of his men in the last hour. In the next 40 seconds, he would be dead, not from that machine gun, but from a place he never thought to look. 3 miles west, Technical Sergeant Raymond Ray Kozlowski sat motionless inside a grain silo. Not near it, inside it. He'd been there for 11 hours. No food, no water, a bucket for waste. His Springfield M1903A4 rested on a sandbag. He had dragged up a rusted ladder in the darkness. Through a hole he'd cut with tin snips, he could see the entire German defensive line. 37 positions, 14 officers identified by insignia and behavior. In the last 6 days, he'd killed 23 of them. The Germans knew someone was hunting their leadership. They had sent patrols, searched buildings, and questioned civilians. They never looked up at the silos. Farm equipment wasn't tactical terrain. That single assumption would cost them the Cotentin Peninsula. Raymond Kozlowski grew up in Sheboygan County, Wisconsin. His father owned 80 acres of dairyland. Ray was the second of 5 sons, meaning he did the work nobody else wanted: mucking stalls, fixing fence, and the most hated job, climbing into silos to break up clogged grain. That last job was terrifying, dark, claustrophobic. 40 feet up a rusted ladder, armed with a sledgehammer and a prayer that the silage wouldn't shift and bury you. Ray did it without complaint, spending hours up there alone. This work taught him 3 critical lessons: applied daily, patience, elevation, and structural concealment. He learned to shoot groundhogs at his uncle's farm, pests that dug holes cattle could step in. Ray was 13 when he shot his first one at 200 yards. By 15, he was the best shot in the county. When war came in 1941, Ray was 22 and exempt as an essential agricultural worker. But 3 of his cousins enlisted, and one came home in a flag-draped coffin. Ray couldn't shake the guilt. In October 1942, he walked into the recruiting office. His father didn't speak to him for 2 weeks. At basic training, marksmanship instructors noticed him immediately. Every target, center mass. They sent him to sniper school at Fort Benning. Ray didn't care about rankings. He cared about effective range and wind compensation. By April 1944, he was with the 82nd Airborne Division in England. The crisis began on D-Day +7, June 13. The German resistance was professional, coordinated, and lethal. They employed systematic execution: radio men first, officers second, anyone giving orders third. Private First Class Eddie Kowalski took a bullet through the throat. Ray knew Eddie from Sheboygan. The German sniper who killed him was invisible. Corporal James Devlin died at 11:40 a.m., single shot. Center mass. Devlin never saw what hit him. By June 14, the 82nd had lost 11 men to precision rifle fire from invisible positions. The Germans had elevation. They were shooting from church steeples, barn lofts, and water towers. American doctrine said suppress with artillery, but the guns were needed elsewhere. Tanks couldn't elevate. Infantry couldn't see the shooters. Lieutenant Marcus Freeman, the officer coordinating sniper teams, was killed on June 15. Ray traced the angle to a second-floor window, a farmhouse. By the time he reached a firing position, the German was gone. That night, Ray couldn't sleep. He realized the Germans weren't just better positioned, they were using the terrain correctly. Elevation, concealment, shoot and move. The American counter-efforts were failing. Ray walked through the captured territory at dawn, studying the Normandy bocage country: hedgerows, small fields, scattered farms, churches, barns, and silos, dozens of them, tall concrete cylinders, 20 to 40 feet high, used for grain storage. The Germans hadn't bothered with them. No tactical value, just farm equipment. Ray stopped at one old concrete structure, 32 feet tall. He climbed the rusted exterior ladder. The view was extraordinary. 3 miles of visibility. Every hedge, every building the Germans were using, was exposed. He could see their sniper positions. The interior of the silo was dark, smelling of old grain and bird droppings. The walls were 3 feet thick, concrete and steel reinforcement. Small ventilation slots ran up the walls, 6 inches wide, 4 inches tall. Ray looked through one. Perfect. He could see out, nobody could see in. Every silo in Normandy was a ready-made sniper hide. Elevation, concealment, structural protection. Buildings were obvious, silos were invisible. Silo shooting wasn't in the manual. The army didn't teach vertical concrete tubes. Ray would have to figure it out himself. Ray spent June 16th preparing. He found an abandoned silo 2 miles from German lines. He climbed up with his rifle, practicing his shots. The angle was severe, 40 degrees down, which entirely changed his holdover calculations. Bullet drop behaved differently at these extreme downward angles. He fired test rounds into empty fields, adjusting his unertl scope. The existing ventilation slots were too narrow. They were only 6 inches wide and 4 inches tall. He used tin snips to carefully widen one. 6 inches became 10 inches. Just enough room for his scope and barrel. The conditions inside were immediately hostile. June's sun heated the concrete like an oven, and Ray sweated through his uniform in an hour. He realized the essential logistics. He'd need ample water, food that wouldn't spoil, rations and chocolate bars, and a waste solution, the bucket. He'd have to remain perfectly still for hours, perhaps days. That night, Captain Robert Henshaw called a briefing. 11 more casualties. The German snipers were winning. Henshaw asked for volunteers for aggressive counter-sniper patrols. Ray did not volunteer. He approached Henshaw afterward. Alone. Sir, I have an idea, Ray stated. Go ahead, Kozlowski. The silos. Nobody's using them. I want to. Henshaw frowned. For what? Shooting positions? Elevation? Concealment? Those things are death traps. You get stuck up there. You're done. I grew up in them. Sir, I know how they work. Henshaw studied him. The weight of 11 recent deaths hung heavy in the room. He saw the grim determination of the farmer who understood risk versus reward math. You do this. You're on your own. No support, no backup, and if you get killed, I'm not sending anyone to retrieve your body. Understood? Understood, sir. Henshaw added a final, chilling warning. You shoot multiple officers. They'll tear this countryside apart looking for you. Ray nodded. Let them look. June 17, 1944, 9:45 p.m. Ray packed his gear in the darkness. His Springfield M1903A4 with the unertl scope. 200 rounds of M2 armor-piercing ammunition. 4 canteens, 6 ration and chocolate bars. The bucket, 2 wool blankets, tin snips, and binoculars. He moved through Allied lines at 11:20 p.m., telling the sentries he was on a patrol. He walked northwest for 3.5 miles, avoiding roads and using hedgerows for cover. German patrols were active. He heard voices twice and stayed frozen. The abandoned silo, 38 feet tall, stood alone against the night sky. Ray checked for mines and approached from the south. He climbed the exterior ladder. Each rung groaned under his weight. The rust flaking off. 38 feet up, a single slip meant death. At the top, the hatch was stuck. He worked it with the shovel handle. Metal shrieked on metal. He stopped, listened, then tried again. The hatch gave. He lifted it 6 inches, dropped his pack inside, and climbed in. Ray set up in the northeast quadrant. 32 feet up, he widened the upper slot with the tin snips. Ignoring the metal shriek, after 20 minutes of cramping hands, the slot was 12 inches wide and 8 inches tall. Enough. He arranged the 4 sandbags as a rifle rest. The angle was severe, 42 degrees down. Laying prone was awkward, kneeling was best. He knew his knees would hate him by morning, but the position was stable. He organized his ammunition, water, and rations, everything within arm's reach. He wouldn't stand for 12 hours minimum. He positioned the bucket in the corner. At 1:15 a.m., he settled into position. The waiting began. He had waited in silos before, waiting for his father to call him down. The risk was absolute. If the Germans found him, he'd die. No escape route. But Ray thought about Eddie, Devlin, and Freeman. Ray could stop more deaths, or he could die trying. The math was simple. By 2 a.m., his knees ached. He shifted his weight, checked his scope. The anger kept him awake. He thought about groundhogs, and how he'd learned to wait them out. Patience was the weapon. At 4:47 a.m., the sky began to gray. Ray watched the landscape emerge, hedgerows first, then buildings, then roads. By 5:30 a.m., he could clearly see the German positions, the church steeple, the barn, the farmhouse, exactly where he had mapped them, and exactly where his targets would be. At 6:12 a.m., an enlisted German soldier emerged from a farmhouse, walked to a well, drew water, and drank. Ray watched through his scope. He didn't shoot. Enlisted men were not the target. Officers made decisions, officers coordinated defense, and officers kept soldiers alive. Removing officers would collapse the system. At 6:58 a.m., a Feldwebel sergeant emerged. He carried a map case, walked with purpose, and entered a separate building, a headquarters function. Still not the primary target, but worth noting. At 7:19 a.m., Lieutenant Klaus Becker stepped out of the church. Ray knew him by reputation: aggressive, competent, responsible for at least 6 American deaths. Becker wore his officer's cap, carried binoculars, and walked into the open to scan the American lines. Ray's crosshairs settled on Becker's chest. Range: 820 yards. Wind: 3 to 5 miles per hour. Left to right. Angle: 40 degrees down. Ray adjusted his point of aim: 4 inches right, 2 inches high. He controlled his breathing: in, out halfway, hold. His finger touched the trigger. Pressed. The shot echoed inside the silo like a cannon. Through the scope, Ray saw Becker fold. The German officer grabbed his chest and fell backward. Ray watched 2 soldiers rush to him. Too late. The M2 round had punched through Becker's sternum. Ray cycled the bolt, caught the casing, and settled back into position. The Germans reacted immediately. Soldiers moved between buildings. Now cautious, they tried to coordinate a response, locate the shooter, suppress, assault, but they didn't know where to look. Becker had been shot from the east, so they searched eastern buildings, barns, and the church. They never looked at the silos. At 8:33 a.m., Captain Hermann Schultz exited a stone farmhouse. Schultz carried a radio handset, coordinating with higher command, reporting Becker's death, and requesting artillery or air reconnaissance. Schultz moved into the open, handset to his ear. Range: 1.040 yards. Wind: 5 miles per hour. Quartering. Angle: 38 degrees down. Ray adjusted: 6 inches right, 3 inches high. He fired. Schultz dropped the handset, clutched his throat, and went down. 2 officers down in 94 minutes. Ray cycled the bolt. The Germans were panicking now. Radio chatter would be frantic. Chaos was setting in. At 9:15 a.m., Sergeant Jacob Mertens, the same sergeant from the opening scene, appeared in a third-floor window, directing fire toward American lines. Mertens was aggressive and effective. Range: 780 yards. Angle: 44 degrees down. Ray adjusted 3 inches right, 1 inch high. He fired. Mertens's head snapped back, and the sergeant disappeared from the window. 3 kills in 2 hours and 28 minutes. Ray could see the crisis. Officers refused to show themselves. Sergeants led from behind walls. Communication was breaking down. At 10:02 a.m., a Kubelwagen staff car arrived. 3 senior officers exited: 1 Oberst, colonel, and 2 Hauptmann, captains. Senior leadership was coming forward to assess. The colonel moved into the open, map case in hand. Ray had 5 seconds. Range: 950 yards. Angle: 39 degrees down. Ray compensated: 8 inches left, 2 inches high. He fired. The colonel staggered, grabbed the doorframe, and collapsed. 4 kills in 3 hours. The Germans were now tactically leaderless. Throughout the day, Ray waited and watched, capitalizing on brief moments of exposure. 1:47 p.m., Oberleutnant Friedrich Kahl, first lieutenant, directing a mortar team. Ray fired. Kahl fell. The mortar team abandoned their position. 3:25 p.m., Feldwebel Otto Zimmermann, staff sergeant, coordinating ammunition resupply. Ray fired. Zimmermann dropped. The resupply halted. 5:19 p.m., Lieutenant Hans Bader, second lieutenant, leading an assault element. Ray fired. Bader went down. The assault faltered. 7 kills on day 1. Ray's body screamed. His knees were raw. His back ached, and his eyes burned from scope strain. He drank water, ate a D-ration bar, and ignored the smell of the bucket. At 8:34 p.m., Ray allowed himself to lean back. The Americans were pushing, the Germans were retreating. Command dysfunction was visible even from 3 miles away. Ray thought about Eddie, Devlin, and Freeman. He had ammunition, he had position, he had patience. He ate the rest of his D ration. wrapped himself in the blanket, and prepared for his second day. Ray woke at 4:30 a.m. on June 18, his second day in the silo. His knees were stiff, and his back protested every movement. He ate, drank water, used the bucket, and resumed his position by 5:15 a.m. The Germans were different today. They had learned, movement was minimal, officers stayed inside. When they appeared, it was briefly, doorway to vehicle, vehicle to building, never in the open. They were rotating positions, which was smart, but functioning meant exposure. At 7:23 a.m., Sergeant Jacob Mertens appeared in a third-floor window. Different building from yesterday. Mertens directed fire for 40 seconds. Ray waited. Patience. Mertens leaned forward, pointed. Ray fired. Mertens dropped. 8 kills. Throughout the day, the pattern continued. Oberfeldwebel Kurt Weber at 9:41 a.m. Lieutenant Stefan Richter at 11:18 a.m. Hauptmann Ernst Graf at 2:07 p.m. Feldwebel Paul Schneider at 4:52 p.m. 12 kills in 2 days. By evening, German radio traffic was chaos. The command structure wasn't just damaged, it was severed. On June 19, Staff Sergeant Tommy Reeves was scouting German positions from a hedgerow. He watched an officer emerge from a farmhouse, watched the officer's head snap back, and watched him fall. Reeves searched for the shooter. American lines. No angle, buildings, no movement. He was confused. That afternoon, 3 more officers died the same way. Reeves counted 16 German officers killed in 3 days. On June 20, Reeves found Captain Henshaw. "Sir, what's happening to the German officers?" Henshaw looked at him. "Someone who understands farming." Reeves didn't understand, but he stopped asking. That night, he watched a silo in the distance. The next morning, another German officer died, and Reeves noticed the silo was in the correct position for the angle. He climbed a tree, looked at the silo through binoculars, saw nothing, but he finally understood. 2 days later, Reeves approached Ray at the command post. Ray had returned for resupply after 16 days in the field and 23 confirmed kills. Reeves asked quietly, "The silos?" Ray looked at him. "What about them? That's where you're shooting from." Ray said nothing. "How? I grew up in them." "Can anyone do it?" Reeves asked. "Anyone who's not claustrophobic." Reeves nodded. "I grew up on a ranch. I'm not claustrophobic." "Then find a silo. Bring water. Bring patience." By June 22, Reeves was in a different silo, 2 miles east of Ray's location. He killed his first officer on June 23. Word spread among the snipers through quiet, unofficial conversations. Kozlowski is using silos. 30-foot elevation, perfect concealment. Germans never checked them. By June 25, 4 American snipers were operating from silos. By July 2, there were 17. The Germans noticed the increase in elevated American snipers, but they searched buildings, water towers, and church steeples, never considering silos, farm equipment. Irrelevant. On July 6, Hauptmann Rudolf Hartmann led a platoon through a contested village. American sniper fire was constant, precise, and elevated. An enlisted man mentioned the silos. Hartmann looked at the concrete cylinders. He shook his head. Nobody would use those. Too exposed, too trapped. He was wrong. That afternoon, Hartmann was killed by a shot from 800 yards. The shooter was in a silo Hartmann had walked past that morning. By mid-July, German officers in Normandy were operating under new, restrictive protocols. Never appear in open terrain. Never elevate. Never stand still. Their tactical effectiveness degraded, not from American firepower, but from American patience, from farmers who understood agriculture better than generals understood tactics. On July 18, American intelligence intercepted a German radio transmission. American snipers operating from farm structures. Possibly grain storage. Advise extreme caution within 2 kilometers of silos. The intelligence officer who read it was confused by grain storage and filed the report without distributing it. The innovation spread globally, to Italy, then to Belgium, then to Germany itself. Wherever there was agriculture, there were silos. In the 3 weeks after silo tactics spread, confirmed kills jumped to 4.7 per sniper per week. Officer kills increased to 2.1 per week per sniper. American casualty rates from German precision fire dropped by 45%. The 82nd Airborne's after-action reports noted significantly reduced German command effectiveness but attributed it to improved tactical positioning and persistence. They didn't mention silos. They didn't mention Kozlowski. In August, the Army's Ordnance Department investigated climbing silos themselves. Their report concluded, grain storage structures provide excellent elevation, concealment, and structural protection for designated marksmen. Recommend assessment of similar structures in other theaters. The report was shelved in Washington. The silo was not yesterday's innovation. During the Battle of the Bulge in December, 9 American snipers operated from silos across the Ardennes. They killed 41 German officers in 3 weeks. Command dysfunction contributed directly to the Allied breakthrough. Post-war analysis credited silo tactics with saving 200 American lives between June and December 1944. The technique reduced German command effectiveness by an estimated 30 to 40%. The report was classified until 1982. In 1946, the Army revised its sniper doctrine, FM 23-10. Section 7 covered non-traditional elevated positions. In a single paragraph on page 43, it referenced agricultural storage facilities as potentially useful in rural environments. No attribution, no history, just doctrine. Ray survived the war. He killed 28 German officers across 11 months. He returned to Wisconsin in August 1945. His father met him at the station. They shook hands. His father asked if he was ready to work. Ray said yes. He spent the next 42 years farming the same 80 acres. He never talked about the war. When asked, he'd say, "I did my part." In 1978, he attended an 82nd Airborne reunion. He talked with Tommy Reeves, who thanked him. The silo technique had saved his life in Belgium. Ray nodded and said he was glad. They never discussed it again. In 1991, a military historian tracked him down. Ray agreed to a 3-hour interview. He never asked for credit. The official record credited improved training. The innovation was absorbed, the inventor was forgotten, but the method lives on, a single paragraph on page 43. The legacy of a dairy farmer who understood that agriculture was more than scenery. And that's exactly right.